1998. I've given several of these talks, and every single time it's a pleasure and an honor to speak at the very best pastel society on the planet. Yay. About a month ago, Bonanza Billy called me and asked me if I would be willing to give a talk at the Pastel Society, and I said, well, I really don't have anything ready to go, but if you run out of luck finding somebody, call me back, and perhaps I can give a talk that I gave 5 years ago here. So she did call me back, and I thought, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Here I am again. So the title of my talk is The Texture of Pastel Surfaces. But you'll see right near the end of my talk, as happened 5 years ago, the subject of the talk takes a right-hand turn. But it leads to a topic that's very important and is important to all artists, no matter if you work on paper with pastels or whatever, even on canvas, and the topic is acid. But let me get through the bulk of my talk, which is texture. So I want to talk about, I'd rather look up here, what is texture in the context of being an artist. I'll show some examples that you'll perhaps recognize. I'll introduce the scanning electron microscope, and on my title slide I failed to point out that I owe a debt to a former Dean of Engineering at New Mexico Tech, Dr. Osmond T. Enal, who passed away a couple years ago, but 5 years ago he let me have access to the scanning electron microscope that they have at Socorro, and also his microscopist, Gary Chandler. I'll talk about pastel papers at high magnification. I presume that none of you have seen what they look like at 500 times X, 500X. I'll talk about sandpaper, because there's a similarity, very curious similarity. And finally, perhaps a summary. So what is texture to an artist? Well, you can control texture as an artist. You can control it by using oil paint or pastels or whatever you're using, and the tools that you use. And you can actually build texture in by the way you apply your medium. And of course, the surface that you're working on has its own texture. So what concepts could we use to quantify or to control a two-dimensional texture? We could measure roughness with the right kind of equipment. We can actually measure how high these things on the surface will project into space. We can look at the pattern that they form, and we can look at the partitioning, the way it occurs, and we can look at flow, and I'll show you some examples of each of these. Roughness. Yeah, this is just a bunch of rocks on a surface, probably a beach that I photographed. Joan Mitchell was famous for doing abstract paintings, and when I look at them, I see roughness. I see the colors sort of projecting into space, even though they are two-dimensional. Pattern. Those of you who may be familiar with Sol LeWitt, he did nothing but things like this. He was known as a constructionist, and some of his famous things were merely instructions on how to paint something. And they were like, draw parallel lines, and they were just instructions. Partitioning. Some of you may have seen peeling paint. Paul Klee did this often. He was a watercolorist from Austria. Flow. That one went automatic. Morris Louis. And there was another famous woman who did this. I can't remember her name right now. Maybe somebody knows.
Frankenthaler.
Frankenthaler. Here's the scanning electron microscope that I was given the opportunity to use down in Socorro. Some of these machines get very elaborate. I mean, they're huge. They're Cadillacs. They can even look at organic materials. There's an electron beam that comes down onto the surface that you're looking at and scans across it like a TV. And so, being a very hot electron beam, it burns organic materials. And this one would do that, but just to say that there are Cadillacs of scanning microscopes out there. This is more of a Ford economy, but it certainly does a good job. But before you put the sample into the machine, the surface needs to be made conductive for these electrons so that they can scatter and run off. And so you have to coat the surface with a sub-angstrom thickness of some conductive material. Sometimes metal is used, sometimes carbon is used. So you coat this thing in a process called sputtering.
Does it change the property of the paper at all?
No, it's so thin that I'll show you some photographs of things that you will recognize, and you'll see that it doesn't change the surface. Sand particles, these are all round because they're always bumping into each other and rounding themselves while grinding the surfaces smooth. Rayon. Here's one that surprised me. The inside of an eggshell. I would look at that and I'd say, that'd make a fine pastel paper. Because you could do a lot of layering.
It looks like the egg whites leak out, doesn't it?
Here's one that some of you may appreciate. No wonder it hurts so damn much. Here's I sent away to companies, Daniel Smith, I guess it was, and asked for samples, and they sent me several. And so you'll see 5 or 6 of them here. I don't remember how many I have. But back 5 years ago, and as well today, I wish that I had included some handmade sanded papers like Paul Murray's, because it would be just as enlightening. Now, the thing you need to think about when looking at these is, can I build up layers on this surface? Here's saber-tooth. Lacquer. Now this is an interesting surface because it's organic material. It's flowers and weeds and
looks like a lot of different things.
Yeah, and one note of caution, if you've ever used this, you know that you can't get it near water. You can't spritz it or anything like that because the surface would just go away. And I know a fellow that uses this almost exclusively. Can you see that?
Yes.
My friend Vasily. By the way, he gave me 5 or 6 sheets that described his workshop that's going to be offered at the New Mexico Art League in the future. Here's the Richardson surface. Now, I don't think I would like to paint on that if I wanted to use lots of layers, because I think the paper would come out very spotty. You know, you'd have real nice color in little holes and not so much in others. Here's the velour surface. I don't know of anybody that uses velour surface, but it does look like it would take a lot of layers. And here's Wallace Pro. I use this stuff almost exclusively. I do some of my own, like Paul does. But when I saw this surface, I thought, how the heck is Pastel going to stick to that? It looks really smooth. But it works.
Looks like the universe section.
There's a BFK Rivet. Again, I love this paper. It's a printmaking paper, but a lot of people use it for pastels. As this paper is often used, Canson. It looks pretty good. There's lots of void space in there. There's UArt. Again, it looks like pastel pigments particles can get down in there and sort of be fixed in place. Now, the interesting thing I found was on the back of UArt, it had this marking, 400, implying 400 grit. And you see the same marking on the back of sandpaper. There's Norton sandpaper, 400 grit. It also says it's waterproof. I'm not sure if that affects too many people, but it's interesting to see there. And Norton looks pretty much like UArt, or rather Wallace. Here's the back of A&H sandpaper, again 400 grit. A&H sandpaper looks a lot like Wallace. There it is again. So at this point I thought, well, I'm going to get some sandpaper, I'm going to ask some friends to paint on it and see what happens. So here's Janine Allen's, Betsy Greenlee, Barbara Clark, Leela Hall, Kenyon Thomas. I wish I paid him for this painting, even though it's sandpaper.
So when
And
you
me.
say sandpaper, you're talking about the sandpaper you buy at the hardware store?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's where I bought it. In fact, you can buy a lot of art materials at the hardware store. So, when you look at these papers and you examine how they behave, I concluded that if it looks like sandpaper, behaves like sandpaper, it's sandpaper. So that gives you some perspective when you go out and buy Wallace. So 5 years ago I thought, well, it'd be cute to compare prices. And not surprisingly, the pastel papers are a whole lot more expensive. And this is a bug of mine. It bothers me when art materials are so much more expensive than the same stuff at Home Depot. It just bothers the heck out of me. And I don't sell sandpaper. I didn't include this 5 years ago, and I didn't include it today, trying to convince you that you guys should go out and buy sandpaper to paint on. That probably isn't a good thing. And at this point 5 years ago, this room turned into pandemonium because a very highly respected pastel artist said sandpaper has acid in it. Well, I'm thinking, I'm here to talk about texture. What am I going to say about this question? And so I did my best. But this place was absolute bedlam. I mean, I've been in gang fights that weren't as bad as this place became.
Does the art contain acid too, though?
I put UArt in there because I couldn't remember the exact comment. And something tickled me in my brain and said, maybe you should put UArt. I don't know. In fact, I have a problem with someone saying that has acid in it. Because after this, 5 years ago, I took time out and I spent a lot of time looking at acid in art paper, trying to find out what kind of information can I find online, what can I do experimentally, what can I do by calling the companies that make the stuff. And I looked at standards. These are all online. ASTM is the one I chose to write a report that I have brought along. I think there are 4 copies left. If you don't get a copy and you want one, please email me and I'll email you a copy of it. I'm familiar with the ASTM because I used it in my career, and so that's where I did the research. But at the same time, there are other standards, ANSI, NISO, ISO. Can you read the comments that I've put down there? As far as the ANSI standards go, I'll mention something about ANSI, but the others aren't worth looking into. I went online and dialed up ISO, and in their search box, I put testing of acid in paper. And the results came back. No results found. Refine your query. So I refined it by going to another page and shutting down my computer. But also, for a nice succinct discussion of acid in paper, you can go to Wikipedia and put in acid-free paper. And there's still probably 4 copies of the Wikipedia down there. Again, if you need a copy and you can get one, please let me know. Some afterthoughts. And this will put you to sleep. pH is the negative logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration in aqueous solution. So when you're at the framer and he says, do you want me to put this in acid-free glass? Ask him how he got that glass into aqueous solution. And did he measure the hydrogen ion concentration? Actually, people have tried to they've spent a lot of time figuring out if there's acid in art paper, but they started looking at important books, encyclopedias, old books, first printings and things like that you find in libraries, because some of these things are getting old. They were made with wood pulp paper. Wood pulp has acid in it in the form of a compound called lignin, and they didn't bother in the old days trying to get lignin out of paper pulp. They left it in, and that's why some of that paper is turning brown and crumbling. But after a while, printers realized where the acid was coming from, and they began to use cotton and cotton linen mixtures. Our money today is made with a cotton linen mixture. I found that there's really no data out there on acid in art paper. Maybe it's because these standards people and the people who do testing don't care a whole lot about art paper. I think it was the ANSI standards. I found a list of places where acid in paper is important, like books and maps and documents. And art was the very last thing on the list. I found out that it's very difficult to do pH testing of paper. One suggested method was, of course you have solutions and litmus papers and things like this, but they said, take the paper and split it in half, because acid in the form of a vapor can absorb on the surface, just like in your closets where you have cedar. The acid can come onto the wood and absorb, and then who knows what happens. If you store really high quality art paper, acid-free art paper, and you happen to be in New York City or Pittsburgh, someplace like that, where there's lots of acid in the air, your paper has acid. So it's really a problem, not only to measure, but to maintain. And I remember taking a workshop from Desmond O'Hagan, a pastelist, an oil painter from Denver. And with regard to this question, what do you do about acid? He said, simply, you do the best you can. I mean, lots of people take their paintings and they put it in a wood frame. Wood outgasses. It does in your closet. So, it's, you know, I'm 76 years old and I've learned that I don't argue about politics. I don't argue about religion. I don't argue about war and taxation, because these arguments never resolve. And so, with regard to art paper, you're not going to get me into an argument. You can go to great lengths protecting your papers and buying just the right things. You do your best. I'd hate to suggest that you put it in a metal frame. It's tough for me to say that it's not fair for someone to say that something has acid in it, because it's hard to measure. There's no data. And so it's irresponsible to say that. People make their living trying to make this stuff. You'll also notice that if you open your Blick catalog or your Jerry's catalog and look up printmaking papers, they'll often say it's buffered. That means to protect against, to provide a barrier against acid that may end up somehow in the paper, they buffer it. They put in calcium carbonate. And if you're making paper at home, you can do the same thing by throwing in a couple of Tums. That's what you're eating, calcium carbonate. Okay, the buffering provides temporary protection. The acid is still there, it's just neutralized. And so with continued accumulation of acid on the surface, you're going to finally get the pH of that paper, if we could measure it, to the acid side. But you're talking, 1,000 years maybe. So your vanity comes in at this point. But in general, it is stated in the standards, the higher the pH, that is, the more alkaline it is, the better the protection. Finally, I don't mean to offend anybody when I say, you're irresponsible if you say it's acid in the paper. And thank you for listening. Questions?
What about matte paper? They're always saying use acid-free matte paper. I mean, matte board.
I have
My-
some old mat, things that were done with old mat board that turned brown on the edges.
My bet is that it's cotton and it's buffered.
It's buffer.
Same thing with calcium carbonate.
Buffered is not acid-free, as I tried to explain. It's buffered.
So when
Which-
they're selling you
which is-
acid-free matte paper, matte board, they're not.
If it's actually acid first,
Yeah,
if it's buffered.
that's true.
Because I used to buy, when I used mat, I would buy rag mat, and I think rag mat is, like you said,
It's
cotton.
cotton.
It's made from cotton.
So that won't brown, but buffered may brown. Or
No,
There's acid in it.
let's say you made this paper with cotton in a water bath that was pH 7, totally neutral, not acidic. And let's assume that the cotton is not acidic. That paper is right on the borderline to becoming acid. It just has to move its pH down a bit upper, smaller number to become acid. So if you're a manufacturer of mat board or paper, it's safe to be on the other side of pH 7. pH 6, 7, 8, pH 6 or 5.
interesting.
Paul,
What does acid do to paper?
what does
What does
acid?
acid do to papers?
I suspect it oxidizes or sulfidizes the fibers. Like acid reacts chemically with stuff. If you put it on your fingers, it'll burn. Vinegar you can drink, but some acids will leach right into your skin. Some acids, like hydrofluoric acid, will go right inside the skin and get into your bones. This is not good. But that kind of acid isn't what we're talking about. I don't know the exact chemical reactions that go on, if that's what you mean. Sulfidation is just as bad. Sulfur is in the air too, and it can turn into sulfuric acid.
I remember one of the comments 5 years ago had to do with archival. Is acid and archival related? Is that what makes something more or less archival?
A couple of days ago, I called the owner of the newsletter and the place that sells archival equipment. And I asked him, what's the definition of acid-free paper? And he didn't have one. He stumbled and staggered and went into the standards. And the pure definition is anything that's in it is acid-free.
What?
Anything that's in it is acid-free. The pigment, the sizing, the water, the fibers themselves, and the paper that you put it on. All of it has to be acid-free. That's a tall order.
And wherein does the shift occur? Where it will move to acidity?
At pH 7.
And how does that happen? Exposure to the environment? To the wood?
Yeah.
To,
Yeah, anything that water can dissolve lots of stuff. And if it dissolves just the right stuff, it'll turn acid. On the other hand, it can dissolve alkaline stuff too. So you get a range of pH values.
I did look it up, and it was talking about anything that you want to archive or keep for any period of time. The acid is what causes the paper to yellow. It's what causes it to become brittle. So,
Right.
in time, that's the problem.
But when you're careful, time could mean thousands of years,
It could.
or it could mean a year.
Yeah.
Well,
Could you explain the role of gesso and how it affects acid, or how it works as a buffer? Because I know that, like, for instance, oil pigments is probably because of the binder affects cotton and linen, so that's why you put gesso on.
right. To me, it's just an isolation barrier. It also is acid-free. I mean, you could make it acid, you could buffer it too. But to my way of thinking, I just put it down as a barrier. Paul?
Is pigment itself alkaline or acidic? Or does it have a property like that?
I don't know.
Depends on the material the pigment's made from.
Yeah, if it has acid in it, it's acid. I don't know the chemistry of pigments, oil or otherwise. I'm a novice here, just like you. I'm just trying to get out of this talk as fast as I can. And I try to give you the best answer I have. But there's a lot I don't know.
So did any of the artists that you asked to use the sandpaper say, oh wow, I think I'm gonna go this direction?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
They didn't, they
No.
would never use it again?
I've used it. It's a lovely surface to play with. It really is.
Which one?
The gray,
400 grit sandpaper, period.
the gray surface, beautiful to work.
Yeah, it's nice to work on, but I'm not gonna tell someone or advise someone to use it. First of all, you only can get it like, 8.5 by 11 sheets. You can buy big rolls of it if you want to go that far. So you end up going to Artisan because it's easy, or you mail it away. And
I would think that the gray one's better than the brownish one. The brown one's almost seems like it's already brown, but the gray one, it's a different type of texture in the paper, too.
I don't know.
It's fun for beginners who don't want to lay out a lot of money for sandpaper.
Yeah.
Let me say something about gesso. Gesso's pretty expensive when you buy it at Artisan. You get a little jar like this for like $30. Well, my wife and I, Jackie and I, took a workshop from a very well-known artist whose name is Ned Jacob. Ned does fabulous drawings, charcoal drawings. He teaches it at Scottsdale. He does great pastels and oils too. He's been around for a long time. He said he called to find out about the chemistry of gesso and learned that the same chemistry exists in sealing white paint. And you can get a gallon of that stuff for cheaper than you can buy a little piece of gesso.
Wow. We're not
Do you use sealing white instead of just
I do.
painting sealing?
You can also make your own gesso pretty easily.
The old people did. I'm not referring to anyone in this room.
Not including us.
When you say sealing white, is that C-E-I-L or S-E-A-L?
C-E-I-L, sealing.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
It's a kind of polymer. It's officially, which is very close to being what you get in a jar of gesso. You can also get samples of many, many different kinds of colors in the same chemistry. Little jars like this for $4. You can put a palette together for cheaper than you can buy a whole bunch of, or just a few tubes of oil paint. Anyone else? Paul, you surely have another question.
I was just going to say, as experiments, I went down and I think at Home Depot, you can order online, and I have a complete palette of, I think it's 3 or 4 ounce bottles of latex paint, and you can paint with them.
Yeah, we have about 20 of those.
There's an abstract artist in town who uses a lot of them. Yeah. She watches for when they go on sale for $2, and then she's got all the different colors.
And they have such things at Lowe's too, not just Home Depot. Yes.
So if I apply pastel to a paper and liquefy it with rubbing alcohol or odorless mineral spirits, am I basically acidifying?
No.
Acidifying the paper then, adding acid?
No,
What about spray fixatives?
not, I don't think so, no.
It's got acetate, isn't it?
That's something different. You know, when you talk about these various materials, I think you'll find a more difficult task of measuring pH in those materials than you have with measuring it in paper. Remember, it's minus the logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration in aqueous solution. And so if you're going to put alcohol in aqueous solution, maybe you can test the pH. I'm not enough of a chemist to know. I know how pH is made. pH is measured with an electrochemical setup, but you can write away to Archival and Talus and get pH pens. You can write it onto your paper and see if it turns a color. Or you can get litmus paper and dunk it into your solution. There are ways of doing that. I've done a lot of that too. It turns out I did it after I gave the talk last time. But you'll find comments in ANSI and other places that if you use these materials, you'll find that that different tests will give you different numbers. That's not a reliable way of doing things, to my way of thinking. Sharon?
So I'm also thinking about acid-free foam core versus non-acid-free foam core. The framers will tell you, well, you have to back it with acid-free foam core. But does that make any difference? And is the acid-free part of the foam core the inner heart only?
And again, I have to give you my perspective. I took a workshop from our Grandmaster Paul, and he showed us how to make really nice scrapers for doing pastel. Well, you use archival foam core. I still have a big sheet of the stuff with a few notches taken. Again, I don't know the chemistry of foam core.
The foam core, the inner isn't acid-free. The paper that sides it is. That one I do know. Yeah, it's just the paper that's on both sides of the foam core.
Again, that's probably hearsay.
Buffered, whatever.
I mean, when you make a statement like that, do you have proof? Do you have data?
As retentive as I was about 10, 15 years ago, I've dug deep and asked manufacturers about it. So that's where that information came from.
Well, they're not going to tell you it's got acid in it.
Nope.
Back in '95, when Ersta was the sanded paper artists were using instead of UR, because Ersta was the original company, I took a workshop with Albert Handel, and he was promoting the Ersta paper, the sanded paper. And someone in the class asked about this acid-free part. And he said, well, it depends if you want your paper to last a couple of hundred years or several hundred years. Does it really matter to you? And if you look at it that way, it doesn't matter really, I don't think.
That's the way I look at it. I don't expect mine to be hanging around 1,000 years from now. This place will probably go up in a ball of fire in less than that.